A good comedian says funny things, but a great comedian says things funny. I don't think there's a single quote about comedy that better describes the late great Norm Macdonald. When it comes to delivering a joke, there are very few comedians that were ever as gifted as Norm, and the reason for this was that Norm mastered a simple but effective way of conveying a message. Mark Twain called this style of storytelling the humorous story. What is the humorous story? What makes it unique from other types of stories? How did Norm use it on late-night TV appearances, and how does one learn this storytelling ability for themselves? All of these questions will be answered by the end of the video, so if that sounds interesting to you, then let's hop right into it. To begin with, Norm Macdonald had been doing stand-up comedy for many decades in a lot of these popular late-night clips, so by repetition, Norm had already mastered the art of his comedic delivery and his ability to tell a humorous story. Along with that, Norm was an avid reader who greatly appreciated the works of writers like Leo Tolstoy and Mark Twain. Mark Twain actually wrote a short novel called How to Tell a Story and Other Essays about different variations of storytelling. When you read through this novel for yourself, it all starts to make more sense. In paragraph 2, Mark Twain says, quote, "There are several kinds of stories, but only one difficult kind, the humorous. I will talk mainly about that one. The humorous story is American, the comic story is English, the witty story is French. The humorous story depends for its effect upon the manner of the telling, the comic story and the witty story upon the matter." End quote. Follow this in paragraph 3, it reads, quote, "The humorous story may be spun out to great length and may wander around as much as it pleases and arrive nowhere in particular. But the comic and witty stories must be brief and end with a point. The humorous story bubbles gently along, the others burst." End quote. When you read this, it almost feels like Mark Twain wrote this section directly after watching a Norm Macdonald joke on Conan's late night talk show. It emphasizes that the destination of the humorous story is not of any real significance and that the constant setting and breaking of expectations throughout the joke is what makes it incredibly special and entertaining for the listener. The comic story that you typically hear from your friends or family members is essentially just one big build-up for an often mediocre or unsatisfying ending. Anyone can tell the comic story, but it takes a lot of practice and finesse to tell the humorous story and to tell it well. This type of story resembles anti-humor in the capacity that the ending is sometimes anticlimactic, but I think the biggest distinction is that anti-humor is a joke told with the intention of its unfunniness being entertaining, but the humorous story is told while the storyteller just ensures that the journey is very enjoyable with less of an emphasis on the ending. Mark Twain even says as much in the next paragraph when he writes, quote, "The humorous story is strictly a work of art, high and delicate art, and only an artist can tell it." End quote. This is why I preface this analysis by telling you how Norm had been a veteran of stand-up comedy for decades and decades before we heard the moth joke or heard him call his wife a battle axe. To tell any of these jokes with the flair that Norm told them with takes many hours and many years of hard work. Mark Twain is not exaggerating when he says it is a high and delicate art. Twain then further details the difference between the humorous and comic story when he writes, quote, "The humorous story is told gravely. The teller does his best to conceal the fact that he even dimly suspects that there is anything funny about it. But the teller of the comic story tells you beforehand that it is one of the funniest things he's ever heard, then tells it with eager delight and is the first person to laugh when he gets through it. And sometimes if he has good success, he is so glad that he will repeat the nub of it and glance around from face to face, collecting applause and then repeat it again. It is a pathetic thing to see." End quote. When I first read this paragraph, I immediately thought of the most convoluted joke ever that Norm does on the Conan O'Brien show.
There was a fella went by the name of Jacques de Gautier. He was from Témiscamingue, Quebec. And Jacques de Gautier, he was a fella that really thought. He was, while I was scrambling to get out of high school, Jacques Zagatineau had already...
I think you just changed his last name.
Well, you know, a man grows.
Norm is 30 seconds into a story about Jacques de Gautier, and he's already found a clever and cute way to make a joke about his name. He pretends there's nothing even remotely funny about the line, "a man grows," when he subtly delivers it. This is an incredibly unique subversion, but Norm says it as if he has no idea it's about to make the entire room burst into laughter. And that's part of the beauty that Mark Twain articulates for the humorous story. Quote, "Very often, of course, the rambling and disjointed humorous story finishes with a nub, point, snapper, or whatever you like to call call it. Then the listener must be alert, for in many cases the teller will divert attention from that nub by dropping it in a carefully casual and indifferent way, with the pretense that he does not know it is a nub." End quote. Another fascinating thing about Norm's delivery is when he fools you into thinking a story or joke is complete, and you quickly realize after you laugh that you're still in the setup of the joke, and you're just trying to pay attention and see where he's going to take you next. Mark Twain also detailed someone named Artemus Ward who commonly used this trick when he was telling a humorous story, where he would deliver a joke, and when the audience took a second to catch it and they started laughing, he would look up with this innocent surprise on his face as if he didn't just say something hilarious, which sounds identical to what Norm Macdonald does. Another important part that Mark Twain highlights about the humorous story is the use of the pause. Quote, "The pause is an exceedingly important feature in any kind of story, and a frequently recurring feature too. It is a dainty thing and delicate and also uncertain and treacherous, for it must be exactly the right length, no more and no less, or it fails of its purpose and makes trouble. If the pause is too short, the impressive point is past, and if it is too long, the audience has had time to divine that a surprise is intended, and then you can't surprise them, of course." End quote. We all know Norm was a master at his comedic timing, and he uses the pause as much as he can to make a funny story even funnier, as mentioned by Mark Twain in How to Tell a Story and Other Essays. Now, I have no evidence suggesting that Norm Macdonald read this story by Mark Twain and used this as his blueprint for late-night television appearances, but I do know that Norm Macdonald was an avid reader of Mark Twain's literature. I can confidently state that this short novel by Mark Twain describes in great detail the process that Norm Macdonald is well known for on his late-night appearances. In order to tell a humorous story and emulate exactly what Norm did on late-night television, you have to apply a few basic principles. First of all, you have to be absurd and incongruent while setting up the story, but the hard part is you have to do it so subtly that people don't realize that you're doing it on purpose. Quote, "To string incongruities and absurdities together in a wandering and sometimes purposeless way and seem innocently unaware that they are absurdities is the basis of the American art, if my position is correct." End quote.
And we thought, boy, he's going to be the next. We had Jean Marchand, Gérald Tertier, Pierre Trudeau, the three wise men of Quebec, by God. And, I met him, I started to do stand-up and travel from here to there and to here again. One time I was in Niagara Falls, and gosh, I went over to the Sea World there. You know how they have the Sea World? You know, with the different fish. You know.
I didn't know that, but okay, yeah, yes.
This was a perfect execution by Norm in the initial setup. He continues to follow this blueprint with several great jokes, then he applies the second principle, which is using the pause to build suspense.
So I was checking out the beluga whales and stuff, and I look over, and who do you think I see?
I hope it's that guy.
No, it was just an attendant, but he showed me to the place I wanted to see, which is where they feed the little baby dolphins.
This silly joke works because Norm is just teasing us with details the entire time and pretending like he doesn't know exactly what he's doing. Then the third principle is to throw away the ending punchline. After Norm has warmed us up, he delivers the final punchline when Jacques de Gatineau is feeding baby dolphins.
And who do I see there but Jacques de Gatineau? And here he is, he's feeding the baby dolphins. And I go up to him and I go, "Jacques de Gatineau, I feel shame for you. You were our hope. You were to go to Canada, Canada's nation's capital of Ottawa. All of Témiscamingue, Quebec, pinned our hopes on you." Now that's a hell of a burden for a man to have a town's hope pinned on them. So he was feeding these baby dolphins, you know. And I said, "I'm ashamed of you, Jacques de Gatineau. You could have done so many great things." He said, "I think I'm serving a youthful porpoise." Now, I believe that...
If there were no incongruities and absurdities throughout the story, this would have been the shittiest comic story ever, but because Norm understands that the journey in the story is more important than the destination, he is able to deliver this corny-ass punchline and receive a huge laugh from it. Norm made the whole story interesting to listen to, so as a result, the ending being anticlimactic doesn't really hurt the joke at all because it's not the focal point of the joke. Now, I know that I laid out these principles like anybody can do this, but the truth is, most people can't. It takes years of practice and hard work to tell a humorous story like this, but at least you know how Norm did it now. When you understand the chasm of difference between a generic comic story and a beautifully delivered humorous story, you come to appreciate Norm's ability to pleasantly waste your time even more so than you did before. Telling a joke like this takes years and years of hard work, and it cannot be learned overnight unless you are simply gifted beyond measure. Let's face it, we're all unfunny compared to Norm Macdonald. He was the fucking greatest. All in all, this is how Norm Macdonald tells a joke. If you enjoy the video, leave me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you're new. That's all I got for you guys today. In the meantime, here's another great video about Norm Macdonald that you can watch right now.